All right, so what is a bond ladder? There are essentially two types of bond ladders, and we are talking about the type of bond ladder that most people don't discuss. So there's what's called a maturity ladder, which is what most people are talking about when they talk about bond laddering. We're not going to discuss that at all because we're not going to confuse you. And there is a coupon ladder, which is what we are talking about with our bond laddering. So Kenyan bonds have really, really great rates of return right now. Their rates of return are somewhere between 12% and 18.4607% at the highest, right? So there are two different types. Well, there's more than two different types, but for our purposes, there are two different types of bonds that we look at. One is an infrastructure bond, and infrastructure bonds are tax exempt on the Kenyan side, right? And then there are fixed deposit bonds and saving bonds and all of that. Those are essentially the same in the sense that there is a tax that needs to be paid. Now, here is the beautiful part about the tax. It is called a withholding tax if there's a tax to be paid on this side, okay? That withholding tax is typically a final tax, right? And it's typically 10%. It's 10% of the ROI, not 10% of the face value of the bond. So if you're making 12% in the bond, but there's a 10% tax, no, that doesn't mean that you're making 2%. You still make the whole 12%, and then of the 12%, 10% is withheld, okay? So what you're looking at is you're looking at the end of the year, there's a withholding tax certificate. It is a final tax, so there's not much else that you need to do. You can actually legally file what's called a nil return, which is essentially just filing a tax return that says I didn't make anything, I don't have a tax liability, none of that, because you've paid your final tax. If you get ACPA, which typically our clients do use, they can file a full tax return for you just for the sake of doing it, and then they'll attach those withholding certificates, and you will owe nothing in Kenya at the end of the year. Anything that you might owe to another country, I'm talking to you Americans who get taxed globally on all income, is something that has to be dealt with your local, tax people. But for everything here in Kenya, we got you covered, right? We also have enrolled agents here in Kenya that understand the intersectionality between U.S. federal taxes and Kenyan taxes, right? Your state taxes, though, are still something that may need to be worked out, especially for the first year you come here. They're going to try to hold on to you for that 1 year. Okay, so that's going to be a different video as far as tax nexus and tax domicile, right? Two terms that essentially mean the same thing. Who has the ability to tax you? And for the first year that you're here, typically your state, unless you're from a state that has no personal income tax to begin with, like Florida, you're typically going to claim that you still have a tax domicile there for at least half of the year. It's up to you to essentially prove that you don't have tax domicile there. And again, that's part of a completely different discussion that we will have in the future. As far as what reflects against you guys is that you can absolutely get into a situation where the money coming in off of these bonds, because the interest rate is so high. Remember, historically, the S&P 500 grows at about 10% per year, right? So you're talking about you're here in Kenya and your money's growing at 12, 13, 14, 15% guaranteed for the maturity of the bond. Now, we talked about the ladder being a coupon ladder, right? So circle on back to what the heck does that mean? Coupons are the payments that come from bonds, right? It's the ROI. We just don't call it a dividend or an ROI. In bonds, we call them coupon payments. What a bond is the bond is you being used as a bank. Now, these are government bonds. So in this case, it's the government using you as a bank. They're taking a loan from you and they're guaranteeing you X amount of interest on the loan. How do loans work, right? How does your mortgage work? How does your car loan work, right? You pay the principal and the interest. Well, now you're the bank. So you're getting the principal back, right? So the face value of the bond, the principal, of the loan that you put in, you get that back plus the interest, just like the bank, right? So for the term of the bond, you get all the interest payments. at the end of the bond, what's called the maturity, you get the entire principal back. Okay? So the principal comes back. That doesn't have a withholding tax on it because it's post-tax dollars, right? It's money that you've already made, that you put in, that you've already assumably paid taxes on. So it's only those coupon payments that have the withholding tax, unless you're dealing with an infrastructure bond, which is tax exempt, the gold standard in bonds here in Kenya. And those infrastructure bonds are going to pay you with no withholding tax, and you will owe no taxes to Kenya at all. Again, whether or not you owe taxes to somewhere else is going to depend on where you're coming from. All right. Our clients typically come from the United States, Canada, the UK, and the Caribbean. Right. The US citizens are the ones who have to worry about this. All right. So the United States, unfortunately, taxes all its citizens just for having a passport. Right. Not for their tax residency, aka tax domicile. The only other countries in the world that do that are North Korea and Eritrea. We've never had a North Korean client, and don't think that we ever will. And we've never had an Eritrean client. So the only clients that are in that boat that we end up dealing with are American clients. And because Americans have such an oppressive tax regime, we do have tax professionals certified by the IRS that we partner with that we can refer you to. All right. So what does the bond, the ladder, look like if it's a coupon ladder? So bonds in Kenya, they pay out every 6 months. So one bond pays out half its ROI every 6 months. So if you have, a 16% ROI on a bond, you're getting half of that in 6 months and the other half the next 6 months. You get 2 payments a year with the Kenyan bond system, right? The way that we ladder it is so that you have 6 bonds that pay you out in 12 months, and each bond pays out a different month. So in those 6 bonds, you get 12 monthly payments for the year. So you get a lump sum monthly payment for each month for the next 10, 15, 20, even all the way up to 30 years. There are 30-year bonds, right? Now, every month, there's a different bond available, right? So we can't guarantee that, all right, every single bond we get you is going to be a 20-year bond. You're going to get 20 years every single, month. So what we do is we target 10 years. You get 10 years and at least 10% ROI, right? So there's 10 years that you don't necessarily have to worry about having an income because you're getting a check from the government every single month that takes care of everything. Now, depending on where you live is going to be the efficacy of those payments, okay? Of course, you could just throw more money into it and get higher payments out of it, but depending on where you live is how effective those payments are. And depending on whether you have a home, right? So we often run a special that includes the home, the relocation, the immigration, the bond ladder, because if you have a paid off home, your cost of living dramatically goes down, right? And then typically, even if everything was at the lowest percentage point, like let's say everything was 10%, which we haven't seen a 10% bond in, 3-4 years. But let's say everything was 10%. You were only getting 10% on all of your bonds. If you owned your home, you would still be okay. Right? Now, if you're renting an apartment in Nairobi, sure, the money helps, but because you're renting and you don't own, it's harder to make that bond money cover all of your expenses. Okay? So that difference is there. Sometimes sometimes that bond money just covers the rent, depending on where you're renting in a city like Nairobi. So does it make sense to have money comes in that just covers, your rent, and you just got to worry about money for everything else? Yeah, that makes sense too, right? Because when you land on your feet and you finally do buy a home, then that passive income explodes and grows into something completely different. So that is the high level overview on how we do that without giving away the farm, right? And so those clients that want to come in and not have to worry about, working anymore, what we do with them is we set up that bond ladder. We set them up in a place like Diani, where, they have really great costs of living, but they have all the amenities of home, right? So they're not out in the bush somewhere, and they don't have to worry about money for the next 10 years. So a lot of our folks they're able to just quit their job, say, screw it. I got guaranteed passive income coming in for the next 10 years. Let me just do that and enjoy my life. So if that sounds like something that you want to do, go ahead and connect with us and we can let you know what the next steps are in a consultation. You can book a consultation on our website. You can also go through our assessment process, and see where you stand as far as getting into a full-on bond ladder. Now, you can get into a bond ladder at any price point, all right, if the focus is not to live off of that bond ladder. A lot of our generational wealth clients, which is going to be another, discussion for another episode, but a lot of our generational wealth clients will just use that bond money to compound over time. They won't spend it. Right? So they're not like our relocation clients that are spending it while they're living here. They'll let that money compound so that their kids have a beautiful trust fund at the end of 15, 20, 30 years, right? So there are plenty of ways to use it. Some of our business clients will use the bond as a runway. So remember that $100,000, that they had to put in an account? They'll take a portion of that and then create the bond ladder. And then that money that comes in every month will actually take care of their runway. Because if you ever started a business from scratch, you know that it nickels and dimes you for the first year, right? There's something might go wrong with the toilets. There might be a problem with the roof. There might be something that needs to be repaired with the electric. You might need to buy in a shipment before you've been paid for your last order. And so there's this gap where you need more supplies, but you haven't been paid yet because you have a net 90 or a net 60 or a next 30. And so now you need some capital to come in out of nowhere. And typically the owner has to come up with that capital until the business really gets on its feet. So there are a lot of folks that will use that bond ladder to cover their expenses for the first year or two of business. So there's all types of use cases where you can use these bond ladders. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that these incredibly high ROIs are normally not seen in bonds. Bonds are the safest form of investment. When you invest safely, you normally get very low ROIs. So if you get a bond in America, you'll get 4%, 7% max, right? Here, you're getting 18%, 16%, 15%, 13%, right? So huge numbers, comparatively speaking. That will not last. So people are getting in on the bonds now because once that loan is made, your interest rate on that loan is guaranteed, right? They're taking that loan from you. So that becomes a guaranteed payment for the entire 20 years, no matter what happens with bonds moving forward. So that's why everybody's kind of scrambling to get in on it, because the general consensus is after 2027, which is an election year, the bond rates are going to rebound back down to what regular bond rates typically are. And then the opportunity on the bond side will be greatly diminished. So if you want to be able to make that move and make it in such a way where you could essentially just retire and live off of those bond payments from anywhere from 10 to 30 years, now is the time to act on that. All right. So there is a little bit of, time crunch on that, because no one can really predict the market and no one can control when these bonds are going to rebound to their original prices. All right. So get in touch with us if this makes sense to you. And if you want to be one of those clients that is able to just let it all go and move out here and then live off of those coupon payments, get in touch with us ASAP, and we will make that happen for you. But remember, we need 6 bonds, and there are different bond auctions every month. Only 2 bonds come out every month. There's a shorter duration and a longer duration, and we typically only target 10 years and higher, right? So that means it might take us 6 months to be able to finish your bond ladder, right? So the longer you wait, the closer we get to the point where the ROI tanks on the bonds, right? And it would suck if your last bond was 6% interest versus the other 5 bonds being above 12%, right? So this is something that you move on right away because of the nature of how we implement it, and the only way to implement it, and the clock that might be running out on that. So this is the only thing that we do that does have a kind of clock on it like that, where you need to act now or you may lose out. So go ahead and book a consultation with us if you're super interested in this, and we will go ahead and get into that for you. That is it for the Freedom Philosophy, and I'll see you guys next time.